Welcome, class. I regret being delayed in making many more recordings than I have. There have been some difficulties with my schedule. I want to remind you that in the past we conducted sessions via Skype, and that program allowed us to have interactions so that I could mix up each session with some lecturing, some presentations on my part, and then also receiving comments and questions from you, the class, which I thoroughly enjoyed. And I miss that. I hope perhaps soon we'll be able to go back to that format for the courses that I teach in the future. Of course, under those circumstances, some of the time, not much, but some of the time was taken up by students, which is what I welcomed. I wanted that to be the case, as you were asking questions, making comments, and answering my questions also. So this means that with this format, where I'm the only talking head, as we sometimes say, it means that most of the work, all the work, of course, is being done in terms of the presentation by your speaker. And you are passive in the sense that you are watching the videos after the fact. This means, of course, that I'll probably not really spend an hour on each session. Now, that would be desirable. Normally, we would want to spend approximately an hour for each of the 3 sessions each week. But again, under these circumstances, that will not be possible due to some difficulties with my own personal finances, as well as the situation facing me helping my aged parents to renovate an older home that they need to have a supplemental income. I've been very busy in the last few weeks with additional work that I had not anticipated when I signed on to this class. So although that doesn't help you, it should, I hope, mitigate the circumstance somewhat and let you know why it is that we have gotten behind, and hopefully I'll get on track soon. This is session 1 of week 3. Now week 3 is really scheduled for September the 9th. So we're going to have to do a lot to make up time because we are now in the middle or latter part of the month of October. In this particular week, as you can see from the syllabus, I had slated to discuss the history of graduate school education in general, and then in particular among churches of Christ. And I had prepared some material along those lines, but it won't be an hour's worth, I don't believe. Excuse me for the pause for a moment. I had to take care of some business in terms of the outline and the materials that were organized on my desk. Again, I'd like to say I regret being late in getting this material video recorded, but hopefully we'll be able to catch up in the future, the Lord willing. Let me say there are some of the scheduled lectures that are more appealing to me at a personal level than others. I was excited about the possibility of presenting some. Others I feel like are just needed. They're necessary for this type of course, although I don't get as enthusiastic about presenting them as perhaps I should. But in the next session, when we talk about the knowledge explosion that's facing our world and facing our ministries, I think that I will be more excited because this is an area about which I've had some experience in the past and some knowledge firsthand, you might say, in terms of some of the research work I did at Erskine Seminary. Now it's asking me for some reason to change my color scheme. I've also had some difficulty in the last few days with the equipment that I have. It's older equipment. It's not up to date as some of you have possession of. So we're doing our very best with what we have. Well, I am slated this time to talk about a history of graduate schools among churches of Christ, and I do not have all the information we would like, but want to begin by talking about a graduate school in the generic sense. If you look up online any information about graduate schools, you will find out these schools are also called postgraduate schools, or we're talking about postgraduate studies. It depends on which culture you find yourself in. Here in the United States and in Canada, we normally would say a graduate school, but in Europe you might hear the more frequent term postgraduate work instead of graduate work. It's the same idea. It's after graduating with a baccalaureate degree, which is typically in our culture a 4-year degree, then one goes on to advanced studies such as master's degrees, Master of Theology degree, Master of Divinity degree, doctor's degrees, and other such degrees. Graduate schools are often associated with the humanities, and that would include biblical studies, of course, as we are want to characterize these subject matters. But that can be contrasted with what might be called a professional school. There is not a real major difference between these two terms, but technically speaking, a professional school could be a school where advanced studies are offered in medicine, for example, or nursing, or in business, or law, or maybe some sort of psychiatric studies, whereas a graduate school would be the kind of thing you would expect in terms of a study of history, or a study of science, a study of English or English literature, and of course a study of theology, or a study of the Bible itself. But there are no major differences in the practical use of those words, but there is a technical difference. When it comes to graduate work, expectations of the student now are higher than they were for undergraduate work. This doesn't mean that it's always more difficult, but it means that each student is expected to be more independent in his research of the questions that are raised, the questions that he may want to pursue on his own, and he's expected to offer more original research. Now, all research in a sense should be original in that each individual is doing it, but as a rule, at the undergraduate level, you might be able to get by more with just summarizing the findings of other scholars in a field than you can get by with in graduate work. In graduate work, of course, you do summarize scholarly studies. You do study what others have written, and that's what most of our work consists of course. At the same time, you're expected to make a contribution on your own. So at the end of many master's plans of study, there may be an expectation to do a thesis, to write a master's thesis. I'm not sure how this will work out for us at Asian Christian University. Often an option will be given at the end of a course of study, or even sometime during the course of the master's program, to allow the student to decide if he's planning to finish up the degree by writing a thesis, or if he's planning to finish up the degree by taking additional coursework. Those are the options, generally speaking. Either writing a thesis, a formal master's thesis, or in lieu of the thesis, instead of the thesis, going ahead and taking some more courses that he otherwise would not have taken, because it is expected that the master's thesis itself has the equivalency in value, in academic value, of at least a couple of courses. So those are the options. And again, I'm not sure what the expectation will be for you, or if we will even be able to provide that option. It could be that you would be locked into one or the other alternatives. But we'll find out when we get to that point, and as progress is made in the development of these studies. Now, you are aware, of course, that all of this work is new, in a sense, that we're now moving beyond the graduate work at Asian Christian University, or undergraduate work, into the graduate work, so that we're kind of breaking new ground, as we say. Breaking new ground is a figure of speech to say we're trying things that we haven't ourselves done before. And there may be some problems that have to be worked out from time to time, and we'll try to do that as best as we can. But be patient as we do so. And be patient if we cannot give a definitive answer to all of your questions about how we'll pursue these programs until we actually get into them and they get underway more in earnest. But this is what is expected, usually some sort of special contribution by way of a master's thesis. Then, of course, at the doctoral level, which is the terminal degree, the last degree that would be accomplished in a program of study as you're thinking of moving upward vertically and as an abstraction, you would write a dissertation, which is like a thesis, but of course it's more in-depth than even a thesis. Now again, there is no hard fast rule about how many pages a thesis is to be or how many pages a dissertation may be. I have seen in the shelves at Emory University over here not far away from my home in Atlanta, Georgia, a very fine library, theological library by the way, some theses and some dissertations. Some of the dissertations are 150 pages long, 200 pages long. I'm thinking of 8.5 by 11 sheets, double spaced, usually 12 points, oftentimes New Roman or some comparable common font of that nature, and that's basically what it is. And others will be longer, some up to 300 or even 400 pages. It just depends. I have seen master's theses as small as, say, 50 or 60 pages, all the way up to around 100 pages or so. We will probably have to make some decisions in terms of requirements when we get to that point if you write a thesis. And we will have to have a cap, because it's not possible just to continue to do research and continue to do research at the master's level and expect to be able to finish. You might get interested in something and pursue that to the very end and just never finish. And I've known a very good friend of mine who had that difficulty with writing dissertations. And he's worked on at least 2 or 3, at least a couple that I know of. And to my knowledge, he has never finished one, although he has produced hundreds and hundreds of pages of very, very helpful research in the area that he was studying, but he never was able to finish, just never was able to summarize it all and get it into print. So we don't want you to pursue this too far. You have to make a decision to end and to cull some things, leave some things out, but eventually you will get to that point. So we will cross that bridge when we come to it, as we say, a figure of speech here in my culture. So again, you're expected to do original research. I don't know about graduate schools among churches of Christ in detail as I would like. And I'm sure the information is out there. I'll be honest, I didn't have the opportunity to research this as much as I wanted. And I have some information already that I've known about for years, just being in academia in churches of Christ here in the United States. To my knowledge, Harding University was one of the earlier schools among churches of Christ to offer graduate work in the area of biblical studies. Now, I'm not thinking so much of graduate work in secular fields such as history or science or psychology. I'm thinking of the work that we're doing, biblical studies or theology or church history or something related to our ministry. Harding, of course, has been around for a long time, but back in the year 1952, they began to offer some graduate studies on campus at Searcy, Arkansas, which is where their main school is located. But in the year 1958, they moved over, 100 miles, couple hundred miles away, back east to Memphis, Tennessee on the Mississippi River, and set up a campus there and named that school Harding Graduate School of Religion. And as the name implies, it was dedicated to religious studies and was a graduate school. For many years, they offered master's degrees and Master of Theology degrees, MTH degrees. I think now they offer MDiv degrees, and possibly offer also DMins. I think they offer DMin degrees. But to my knowledge, have not yet begun to offer a PhD, a Doctor of Philosophy degree, as other schools do, for example, Amherst University in Montgomery, Alabama, of which I am a graduate. Harding now is known as Harding Graduate, or Harding School of Theology, rather, Harding School of Theology. That's been a name change in recent years, and this is the Memphis campus. And they're likely among the first to offer these kinds of studies among churches of Christ. Now I am aware of Abilene Christian University in Abilene, Texas, offering a number of studies in graduate work for religious studies, for religious students. Also David Lipscomb University in Nashville, Tennessee, and Freed-Hardeman University in Henderson, Tennessee. I'm also a graduate of Freed-Hardeman at the undergraduate level many, many years ago. And Freed-Hardeman now has a master's program, and they're offering at least a Master of Arts degree and possibly an MDiv. I'm not sure. There are, no doubt, there may be others among churches of Christ that are offering these degrees, but let me say this is a relatively late phenomenon, and that's the takeaway I'd like for you to keep in mind as we remember the summary of this short lecture. Churches of Christ are late in the game when it comes to providing graduate work in comparison to many in the denominational world. a number of large denominations for a long time now, for way over 100 years in the United States, have been offering graduate work in what they call their seminaries. But we have been slower to adopt such a methodology, such a method of study. And I think in some of our future lectures, I'll be able to give my opinion as to why that may be the case, why we may have been slow to adopt such a procedure of training men at the graduate level. I'll have to say this, that among churches of Christ, in many quarters over the years, there has been a tendency on the part of many to be somewhat suspicious of education in general, and particularly of educated ministers. Now, we've wanted to have our men trained at a certain level and have a good working knowledge of the Scriptures. But some have been reluctant to hire men to preach for them in their congregations who've gone on to obtain advanced degrees. There has been a fear that by being in those programs of studies whereby they have attained these degrees, they have been tainted, as it were, or corrupted somewhat in their thinking, so that they may not be sound in their doctrine as they should be, and they may have some ideas that are dangerous for the congregation. You know, there is some reason for such alarm, for such concern, and we'll talk about that in other sessions. I want to warn about the dangers of graduate work. But suffice it to say at this point that because of the general suspicion we have had about the learned ministry, men who have attained advanced degrees and have become elitists and have moved, as it were, beyond the average man in the pew and are no longer in touch with the average thinker in the pew, this has been a perception, whether it has been a reality in the past. Because of that, I think we have been slower to adopt the graduate methodology of study than our counterparts. But we are now slowly but surely adopting that, and I think that much good can come from graduate work. Although, as I'm insisting throughout this course of study, many bad things can happen in a graduate school as well, and I'll talk about some of those in particular in each of the lectures. Some of them have been set aside particularly to discuss those problems, but every time we meet I'll probably talk about some of those things. Returning back to graduate work among churches of Christ, I have some first-hand knowledge of Amherst University's programs. As the information I have would hold, back in the late 1970s and early 1980s, Amherst University, which at the time was known as Alabama Christian School of Religion, Amherst University at that time began to offer master's degrees, Master of Arts degrees, and Master of Science degrees in Biblical Studies. The difference generally was the Master of Arts degree, the MA degree, would require language skills that the Master of Science degree did not require. So one who matriculated into the program of the Master of Arts would have to have some knowledge of either Greek or Hebrew. Sometimes it would be allowed to study both, preferable to study both, but at least one would be required, and usually that ended up being Greek. So Greek would be studied at the master's level. But for men who didn't have the patience or the time or the aptitude to engage in further language studies, the Master of Science degree was set aside, and that was offered for a while. And then the school began to offer it's possible they offered the MTH, the Master of Theology degree, which is an advanced master's degree beyond the Master of Arts degree. But I don't know that went on very long, and that very many people actually finished that program at Amherst University. They did begin to offer, at least in the 1990s, the Master of Divinity degree, which is also an advanced master's degree beyond the Master of Arts degree, but it's considered to be more of a professional degree. Somewhat like the Doctor of Ministry degree is considered a professional degree in comparison to the PhD, the Doctor of Philosophy degree, which is considered more of an academic degree. Those who take the Doctor of Philosophy degree may do so with the expectation to teach, to be teachers, so it's a teacher's degree in particular. Whereas those who earn the Doctor of Ministry degree, or who have earned the Master of Divinity degree, do so with the expectation of serving more in ministry itself. Now, these are not distinctions that hold true in every case, but those are general rules. So, Amherst University began the Master of Divinity degree, and was able to get accreditation for offering those programs many years ago, at least 3 or 4 decades ago. In recent times, in the early part of this century, in the early 2000s, it was the dream of the late Rex A. Turner Jr., who was president at the time of the school. He has now passed on and gone on to his reward. It was his dream to offer a PhD degree for members of the Churches of Christ in one of our schools, an accredited degree program to offer that. Harding did not do so. Abilene did not do so at the time, but we wanted to be the first. And I say we because I was at the time a part of that work and had actually been teaching some courses there based on my Doctor of Ministry degree from Erskine Theological Seminary. It was a noble ambition, and I hope that it still will work out despite the untimely demise of our brother Rex Turner Jr. His son, Dr. Turner, Rex Turner III, I think is technically known as his name, who is a medical doctor by profession, is also now the president of Amherst University. He has taken over and he is at the helm, and we will see where the school goes under his guidance. My prayer is that it goes in the right direction. The dream that his father had, Brother Rex Turner Jr. had, was the dream to provide graduate studies leading to the PhD among Churches of Christ, so that it would not be necessary for our students to go out into other schools, into denominational schools, and there to obtain degrees that might come with a lot of excess baggage in terms of doctrinal aberrations, doctrinal problems, and just outright error that may be picked up and learned. And I've known of many young men who've gone on to earn doctor's degrees in the denominational universities and seminaries to come back with some really strange ideas, sometimes very detrimental and dangerous ideas that they should not have picked up. They just were not discriminating enough to discern between truth and error, and they adopted some of the error that was being taught in those schools. We'll speak about that more, I'm sure, in future sessions. But it was his dream, Rex Turner Jr.'s dream, to provide such a school, and that dream became a reality. In the year 2005, when the first PhD classes convened, and it was my privilege to be a part of that. It took me a long time, but I eventually was able to finish the PhD under the auspices of Amherst University. And so I could have found some more information had I had the time or opportunity, or had it been necessary, particularly, say, in mission fields around the world, and what we might describe as mission fields from our standpoint here in the United States, in other countries where our brethren have set up schools, but I just don't have access to all that information, nor do I think it's necessary for you to be scholars in the history of graduate work. We just want to kind of give an overview for this session about graduate work in general, and particularly among us in Churches of Christ. Again, it's a relatively new thing in comparison to our counterparts in the denominations, and there has been a reason why I think we have delayed in implementing such programs, and that has been our concern for sound doctrine and our suspicion for a lot of the liberalism and false teaching that's going on in the schools that are outside of our fellowship at the graduate level. Next time, we will talk about what I call, and what many have called, by the way, the knowledge explosion of the postmodern era, of our era. And the question is, am I ready for it? Are you ready for it? The knowledge explosion. That will be the next time. Thank you for your patience and your kind attention.